As you can already see, I'm making some assumptions about that you've heard about blockchain technology and your prior knowledge to the extent that assume that you have heard of the concept before. But let's just take one little step back. In essence, what blockchain technology allows is it allows the digital transfer of value. Now, if you think of value transfers, the most natural way to think about it is the transfer of cash. And I will try to motivate the advantages and the functioning of a blockchain using monetary transfers. I'm going to do this in a sequence of slides here. Now, what we look at here is we want to have a person Sue who wants to transfer or send Bob some money. With cash, of course, this is extremely straightforward. All that you have to do is give the cash. But in a digitized world, we have to do it with some form of bank transfer. So now how does that work? Well, first of all, let's take the simplest example. They both have accounts at the same bank. If that's the case, then all that is required is that the bank goes out and changes the ledger entry in its own accounting database, and that's it. All that they have to do is to take a look at the account of Alice, or did I call her Sue? Well, let's call her Alice. Take Alice's account, take the money out of Alice's account, and change the accounting entry in Bob's account, and you're done. Now, there's obviously many banks. I am here in Canada, where we have about 30 banks in the country. If you are in the US, there are several thousand banks. So you can already see this is not so convenient in the real world. So how does it work then? Well, there could be a situation where, so say Bob and Alice or Sue have different banks, right? So how does it work then? Well, the simplest form is if these two banks have accounts with one another. So what would happen then is that Sue instructs her bank to transfer money to Bob. Sue's bank then changes the accounting entry in its own ledger for sending money from Sue's account to Bob's bank's account. Then they send instructions to Bob's bank, and then Bob's bank changes its own ledger entry to its own account and transfers the money then to Bob. As you can see, this is a multi-step process that involves the sending of messages and a relatively complicated accounting operation. Much harsher, much more difficult, of course, than just sending cash. But yeah, as much as we would like to think that this is a simple solution, if you think of the US, where there is, as I said, several thousand banks, it's highly unlikely that two banks actually have the same bank account, have an account with one another. So how does it work then? Well, that's essentially what we have central banks for. The way it works then is that Sue tells its bank it wants to transfer money to Bob, who has an account at a different bank. What the bank then does, it changes again an accounting entry to its own account. So it takes Sue's money from Sue's accounts, puts it into his own account, then instructs the central bank that it wants to do a transfer. Then the central bank makes the transfer from Sue's bank account to Bob's bank's account, and then sends instructions to Bob's bank, and then Bob's bank does the same thing and takes money off its own account and puts it into Bob's account. So again, you can see this is a possibility, and this is why it's one of the major functions of central banks as we have it, but it's a very complicated process. And now think about an international process. Well, that becomes really difficult. If you want to send money from one bank to another, I don't want to go into all the details here, but there is such a thing called the SWIFT network, which is a network of transfer banks where different banks get connected, have accounts with one another, and that are connected in this network, then can move the money around from one account to another so that it goes from Sue's bank's account in one country to Bob's bank account in another country. It's a cumbersome process, it's a complicated process, and it takes actually quite a lot of time. Now, so as I said, it is complex, it requires many parties, it's lots of friction, it's expensive, and it's actually also rather slow. Even though we're talking about electronic messages, mostly the money is not moved around on a transaction by transaction basis. There's usually netting going on over longer time horizons, usually a day, sometimes more. It really depends on which bank you're working with. And as I said, it's a very, very complicated and a very expensive process. If you want to transfer money from one country to another, the fees can be very high. And they exceed just the fee that see on your account. You also have to pay a bid-ask spread on the exchange rates if you have to move money into different currencies. Very complex. Now, the crazy thought, of course, is wouldn't it be nice if we just had a single ledger where all the information is kept, so that all that is required, that a single that there is a ledger entry that is being changed. And you see where I'm going with this. Essentially, this is one of the things that blockchain strives to accomplish. Now, I want to go take this whole thing one step further, because money transfer is really just one operation. If you think about the international monetary system, and international financial markets, there is most, very standard operation and standard function is to have a sale, buying and selling of financial assets. So let's take a very simple example where Sue in the bottom left corner here, let me highlight her. Look, this is Sue. She wants to sell a company called Barrick Gold. It's a Canadian company, and it wants to sell the shares that she has. Let's say 100 shares. What does she do? Well, she has to go to her broker. Let's say here we have TD Securities, and then the broker puts her order and sends it to a stock market. Now in Canada, we have several trading venues. I think it's about 14 at the moment that Sue could use. In the US, there are even more. In Europe, there's also an equally large number. So there's a lot of opportunities there. But the bottom line is Sue has to instruct the broker. So the broker sends an order to a stock exchange. Now, that is one side of a trade. You need a second party. You have, for instance, Bob. Bob now wants to buy Barrick Gold. So he has the money and he instructs the broker to put a buy order to the market. Now, the broker, could send it directly depending on what the technology is. Sometimes they have to go through third-party technology providers. That's a relatively complicated process, and it then ends up on the servers of the stock exchange. Now, suppose Sue and Bob can actually agree on what's going on. What they then have to do is, by the end of the day, the trades are going to be reported to a clearinghouse where clearing and settlement is arranged. Now, this is not the end of it. This is becoming a complicated process. For instance, the netting of trades happen only at the broker level. You have to involve the custodian banks for Sue and its broker. You have to have the custodian banks for Bob and his broker. And then, God forbid that the underlying issue of the security, so that is the company whose stock is being traded, wants to have any information. Well, then who is actually currently owning the stocks? Well, then they also have to, access the record of beneficial ownership, which is commonly kept by a firm called Broadridge, and which charges a little fortune for doing that. Now, that's also not everything, because when Bob wants to make a payment to Sue, we still have to go and do the transfer of the money through the central bank, going back to the account of the broker of Sue, so that Sue ends up with the money in her account. So you can see this is actually not this is not a full description of it. This is a simplified version of it. There can be literally up to 2 dozen or 3 dozen different parties that are involved in a simple stock transaction. All right, now again, wouldn't it be a great idea if all of this, the money transfer and the stock transfer, could happen both on the same ledger? That would be, it's a crazy thought to think about that it could be done. And, nobody in their right state of mind would, of course, arrange a financial system and a financial market in the same way as it's currently working. So, but wouldn't it be great if we have everything in one ledger?